Welcome to my magic guide for Trailblazer League Reloaded. This is going to be our first route combo guide. We've taken the last 9 videos, we've covered each region individually, and now it's time to finally go in and combine some regions and really set up a plan for the entire league. Um, I think this being our first gear combat style routing guide, I want to kind of go over first on how I think when I try to build a route and really what my priorities are. So, there's really 4 big things when it comes to this topic. And the first is obviously you're picking a combat style magic, ranged, melee. And you want to make sure that for whatever style you choose, in this case magic, you have a really, really good gear for that combat style. If you go magic but you can't get any magic weapons, you are not going to have a good time. Second is we want to make sure that there are bosses that you can kill in your regions that are already weak to those styles. Now, a lot of times the combat relics will be powerful enough that you can kill things that aren't supposed to be killed with that style anyway. When you're attacking something that is already weak to magic, a great example of this is magic and the Whisperer, right? Which is you're supposed to kill it with magic. Those fights are going to be so much more fun. So we really want to make sure that you have those bosses that are weak to your style in this region. And then thirdly, we want to make sure that you're not missing any skills, any ways of training things that aren't combat. I think it's really important to consider that when you're making a route. Don't lock yourself out and make sure all of our bases are covered. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and talk about 3 different routes here for this video. 3 different options that I all think are very, very viable and very good. And they all have their pros and cons. And depending on what your playstyle is and what you enjoy doing, you're going to want to pick the one that best suits your playstyle and really, really how you're going to play leagues over the course of these next 8 weeks. So let's actually talk about our mage route then, now that we kind of have this framework set up. So the first thing that we want to touch on is the gear. Let's make sure we have some good gear. And when you look at gear for magic, there are 2 regions that are head and shoulders above every other region, and it's not even close. You have the desert and Kandarin. And because of how far, like leaps and bounds ahead these 2 regions are in terms of gear for magic specifically, it is so hard to do anything else. So we're actually going to go over 3 routes today, and all 3 of them are going to have both the desert and Kandarin in their route plan. When you go into the desert and you unlock it, you automatically complete Desert Treasure 2, which means you also have Desert Treasure 1 completed because it completes all of its prerequisite quests. So you have Ancient Magics, which are so, so good, even just in the main game. But not only that, but you have a bonus here on your Superior Sorcerer Relic that binding spells will always hit unfrozen targets, which means freezes will always hit 100% accurate, which is actually insane. And you get a giant damage and accuracy increase. So very, 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 very strong relic, especially in combination with the desert and ancients specifically. And then on top of that, not only do you get the Master Wand from Mage Training Arena, you have TOA, which gives you the Shadow, the Elidness Ward. You also get all the Desert True bosses potentially unlocked depending on what other region combos. And no matter what, even if you don't pick a region that has any other Desert Treasure 2 boss, you always get Leviathan. The reason why that is so important is you also get access to Virtus, which, if you have a Shadow, isn't quite as good as Ancestral. It is a small step down. But if you're barraging anything in the game, Virtus giving that extra damage buff is so strong. So you'll have a very, very good set of magic gear that you can get towards the end of your grinds, which is fantastic. The top end gear in this region is very, very, very strong. And you also can get Infinity from Mage Training Arena. The minigame points are buffed, very, very strong. So that's the desert. That's why the desert is really strong. Is the top end gear and even the mid game gear for magic is very strong. And then secondly, Kandarin is very strong as well. So you have your top end with Smoke Devils giving you an occult necklace. You have your Demonic Gorillas giving you Zenites, which gives you a Tormented Bracelet, and those together give you a massive, massive, massive damage multiplier On top of the relic, it's so good how the damage scaling stacks in links that your max hits are going to be insane because you take this. If you take other regions, you're going to be leaving just 15% of your total damage just on the table. It's almost too much damage to pass up. You also have the mid game gear, right? Your top end is really good. The tests might be meh around the region, but your mid game gear for magic specifically, you have the warped scepter and you have the trident of the sea available in this region, which means that if you are taking this as a combo with the desert, you need some sort of mage weapon with your relic to jump into TOA and start grinding for your shadow, right? To jump into Leviathan and start grinding for your Virtus set. And you can grab either of these powered scepters and they will be actually insane for the mid-game content until you get those best in slot pieces of gear. So it fills all of the gaps between both these two regions. You have your mid-game gear set. You have your end-game gear set. Now, the other thing with the Desert and Kandrin that we really want to touch on is there bossing and PVM content that is really good in these two regions? And obviously the first thing to talk about is Tombs of Amasket. You can magic basically every single boss besides Kefri. Bob is going to be a little wonky, but with the accuracy increase and the damage increase, you are going to hit just fine. In the main game, Zebek is almost just as good magic as it is ranged when you compare a T-Bow and a Shadow. Akka has its magic phase that as long as somebody doesn't mess up like a butterfly method, you can probably just kill it before it even switches its styles because of how busted this magic relic is. And then Warden, besides a little bit in P2 when he protects from magic and you have to range the boss, you can magic every single part of Warden. So it's very, very, very mage friendly, which is great. Skilling wise, we are missing a couple of things. So like I said, we have a third region. That third region is here to fill in those gaps and make sure that we can mesh together and not miss anything. And then because we're taking these two, we're really not leaving too much on the table as terms of gear and stuff, which is great, fantastic. And now we're just going to look at rounding out our route. So how can we round this route out? What exactly can we do? What are our options, right? What's actually worth going for a third route? And I'm going to present you with 3 routes here. Let's go ahead and let's jump into Zaya. Let's see how that works for us in this route and what that actually looks like in practicality. So what does Karen have that both the Desert and Kandrin do not? Well, the first thing I want to mention is gear. If you want to go absolutely the best in slot gear for magic, you want to go Karen. And the reason for that is Chambers of Xeric gives you access to not only the full ancestral set to replace your Virtus, but you also get Augury, which is your best offensive prayer. That combination is such a big DPS spike. It's not quite as big as going from like mid-game gear plus Torment and Occult, but it is pretty big, even though Virtus is very, very strong. The combination of also getting the prayer here is very, very good. Now, I want you to remember, you are taking a second raid if you are choosing this region, which means you will be doing a lot of raid content. That raid content takes time. There's a lot of tasks. There will be KC tasks. There will be getting all of the loot tasks, and you have to do that not for 1 raid, but for 2. So if you're going this route, please plan ahead that you will be doing a lot of raiding. Luckily, both of these raids are soloable, very commonly even in the main game, and even more so with these relics. You will be able to solo these raids, so you don't necessarily have to wait for friends to be around to raid, which is a nice bonus. If you really, really, really enjoy PVM and raiding, this is a great, great route for you because you will be doing a ton of that nonstop from the first couple of days in till all the way to the very end of the league. So very, very good. From a skilling standpoint, you actually hit every single skill with this. You have a good method for every single skill. And we've talked about those skills really in depth in those region guides earlier through the beginning of the month. If you're not sure about where you're supposed to skill and what you're supposed to be doing in those regions for each individual skill, I recommend going back and watching those. Now, That's the big trade-off, though, is double raid, but you get the Bis Magic gear. Keep that in mind. Now, from an ordering standpoint, because this is also really important when it comes to raids, what order do I take these regions? When I get to unlock my first region, which of these should I be choosing? And honestly, with this route, I would really recommend going in the order of Desert, Zaya, Kandarin. Now, the reason for that is you want to unlock your ancient magics and start getting your magic level up as soon as possible. The desert offers a lot of really good early game tasks, things like Temperos. You can expect Mage Training Arena to be pretty easy. That will get you that nice passive levels. You'll unlock your barrage magic. Thieving is very good in this region, so you'll have good money to fund things, and you should be able to breeze through a lot of the early game stuff in the desert to unlock Zaya relatively quickly. You are actually going to avoid both raids towards the beginning of League. You are going to push those off a little bit until you can get your gear set up situated for Leagues. And in order to do that, you need to get some Slayer levels. So we're going to be very, very Slayer focused in this route. You're going to get Kurend, and that's going to unlock the Catacombs for you, which will allow you to do Burst Slayer for basically every single task you get. Assuming we get a Slayer relic where you can choose what Slayer task you want, which they have not announced yet. There's still so many relics for them to release that it's very likely they choose this. This is something you very likely are going to want to take. And then you are going to choose like Dust Devil task after Dust Devil task into Jelly task into Jelly task into Nectaril tasks, right? You're going to just do Burst Slayer to Burst Slayer to Burst Slayer, and you are going to get the level to do Smoke Devils and get your occult as fast as possible. Once you have that done and you have that Slayer, you're going to have so many levels and different very passive tasks done out of that general task list. You're going to go back and you're going to round out the tasks needed between those two regions, do whatever you need to go and unlock your third region. Unlock Kandarin, go get your occult necklace, start farming your demonic gorillas, get your one Zenite, okay? And then you're going to do a lot of crafting training. Now, luckily, in the desert, you have a gem trader that sells both uncut sapphires and uncut emeralds, and he buys cut sapphires and cut emeralds. So you can actually go to that gem trader, buy your entire inventory worth of gems, cut them all, sell them back, and repeat, and you will profit GP, and you can go all the way to 99 doing this. That way you can make your Zenites. The 99 cape is unfortunately not in your regions this time, but is very, very strong. Okay, you're going to get your Tormented Bracelet, and at this point you now theoretically should have full infinity. You should have a Trident of the Sea. You'll have your Occult, your Tormented Bracer. You'll probably have a Whip from Abyssal Demons for your melee setup. You'll have a ton of money, so you can now just go buy Chaos Runes from Ali Morrison and buy full Obsidian, right? And then the only thing you need is some form of ranged weapon, and there's so many to choose from. Go grab a rune crossbow from Steel Dragons, or however you want to go about getting it, and jump immediately into TOA to get a Fang. Okay, your first priority is getting a Fang from TOA. If you get a Shadow, like, hallelujah, you did it, good job, clap for yourself. We're going to expect that that's going to be the last rare you get because it is the mega rare. We're going to assume you're not going to get spooned here. You're going to grab your Fang, and then with your Fang, instead of your Whip in your setup, you're then going to go to Chambers of Xeric, which means you now have a good melee hand setup, you have an insane magic hand setup, and then you can rune crossbow the head for Olm, and you can start grinding chambers until you get your augury. You can get some ancestral pieces. Alternatively, if you really want to camp Leviathan, you're welcome to go and jump and give that a try with your Trident. Try to get some Virtus pieces. Lots of options here for you. Both very, very good. And that's going to snowball you into that end game where you can start really grinding those raids, really grinding those bosses to get that Bis magic set up and actually just demolish anything you come into contact with. Now, the next route that we're going to cover is your Desert Kandarin Wilderness route. Ooh, spooky. So why is the Wilderness good for Magic specifically. What is this offering us? Now, the first thing obviously is money. One of the big things that the Desert and Kandarin are missing is a way of getting good money that is outside of thieving. And you might think, well, thieving should be plenty. The problem is, if you look at the task list for the last couple of leagues, there were so many tasks for things like laps at Pyramid Plunder and whatnot. You were going to get so much thieving experience doing squirks and Pyramid Plunder and whatnot that spending time pickpocketing Arty Knights for your GP and such is kind of a waste, because you're going to just get too much experience, and you'll cap out the 25-50 mil XP tasks almost without needing to pickpocket at all. So you really want another way to get GP, so you're not wasting your time and doing something just for money for the sake of money. The added bonus of this is the reason you get so much money in the wilderness is because you're camping revs, and revs drop 3 different weapons. Now, these weapons are very strong. And in the vacuum of Magic specifically, if you look at the Accursed Scepter, the Accursed Scepter is so good both inside the wilderness and out. It is a spec weapon, which besides the Fang, you don't really have in your regions. You also have the Claws technically, but you don't have a Magic spec weapon, right? So the wilderness gives you that in the Accursed Scepter and the Void Waker. Looping back to the Accursed Scepter. This lowers the magic defense of monsters. So not only are you already accurate, but once you Accursed Scepter spec, you basically won't miss anything ever. Very, very, very strong. And in the mid game, when you're typically using something like a Trident or your Warped Scepter, this is a reasonable alternative to those. And especially when you're doing wilderness content, this is going to be the only weapon you use, because it is just so leaps and bounds better than everything. And probably including the Shadow, though I haven't ran those exact numbers, but it's going to be close, if not better. Now, I did also mention the Void Waker as a spec weapon. The Void Waker is very, very good with magic. Now, the Void Waker is kind of a weird weapon, because it's a melee weapon that specs with magic. So how does that work with these relics? Now, your attack speed, that increases and halves the attack speed of weapons. That for the Void Waker is dictated by the melee relic, so you don't get that benefit. If you are melee smacking something, it is basically a slightly better Abyssal Whip for you. And that's all it is. It doesn't get really any better than that. But it is there. It is something that you can use in replacement of that whip. That is a little bit of an improvement. But the spec and the damage that it does is actually a magic damage, and that is affected by the magic relic, which is a really, really cool kind of interaction where you get to kind of double down on the magic damage multiplier of the superior sorcerer relic. And just to throw it back up here, you get a 20% damage increase with your specs. So not only are you guaranteed to hit with your Void Waker, you are guaranteed to hit and then do an extra 20% more damage that you normally would do with the Void Waker. So you are going to hit some really, really big numbers. If we happen to get a spec relic where you can spam your specs repeatedly into bosses, this Void Waker is going to hit so hard on everything. And that's just really fun. Honestly, I love doing things like that, and I really enjoy it. And so I think it's worth knowing that this is something that you can do in this region, right? Kind of the next thing with the wilderness that's really important to talk about is the resources that you get from the bosses. Your regions, Kandarin and the Desert, cover a lot of skills, but it doesn't quite cover everything. You don't really have an amazing way of training construction besides the fact that you get a butler in Kandarin, right? Which is a nice little quality of life, but you still need a good way of getting things like logs and planks. And at this point, all you have is chopping some teaks between Misthalin and the Desert. And that's kind of it. You don't really have a good way of getting construction like materials. And the Wilderness actually offers that because the Wildy bosses from the Wildy boss rework drop so many teak and mahogany logs that you'll be able to fund your 99 construction through that. But there's a lot of these random resources that these bosses drop that really fill these gaps and these skillings that you're missing. Zaya just offers those naturally, right? Here you have to be killing bosses to get them, so it's a little bit different. But you need to be killing these bosses anyway because that Void Waker is so good, because the rings are so good. And rings being rare, it's nice to be able to grab something like the Ring of the Gods and have a little bit more prayer bonus. Or there's definitely things here that you can utilize that is really, really, really strong. Now we want to talk about really where the wilderness fits into the sequence of how you unlock your areas, right? What order should you actually be taking this if you're going this route, and what does that look like? So with the wilderness, this actually follows very similar to the path and reasoning of your Zaya route. You want to unlock the desert first for the same reasons. It's very easy to quickly unlock that second region. And then for your second region, you're going to take the wilderness. Now, again, you're going to kind of follow this kind of rush of you want to do Slayer for a couple of different reasons. One, you want to get to the point where you unlock your Slayer, that Slayer relic we talked about. And then you're going to do some burst tasks in the Wilderness Slayer dungeon. That's going to give you Laren's keys. Laren's keys are wonderful when you're doing Wilderness Slayer. And you'll be swimming in them due to the drop rate increase on top of the fact you're bursting and all you're doing is jellies and smoke devils and nechril tasks. Again, all in multi-combat, right? You're going to take those. You're going to get some Dagon High pieces, which is going to be a great magic gear for you. You're then going to go and start taking Revenant tasks, and you want to make sure you're taking these on task, and you're going to camp whatever Revenants you're comfortable with. You can do the Knights in the back and safe spot them. You can do the Demons or the Orcs or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The best ones you can, obviously, the better, higher drop rates, that type of thing. But expect in the first couple of days, the Wilderness Caves are going to be a little packed. People are going to be here killing these. So try to just find one that's empty, or if you're very, very PvP oriented, you'll have Ancient Magics. Go just kill people, knock somebody off the one you want, and just take it over. Totally fine and reasonable to do. And because you did some Slayer first, right, and you did that to get those Laren's keys and try to get some of the Dagon High pieces, you're going to have a little bit higher of a magic level than a lot of people will. And so you should be able to win a lot of these fights in the first day or two of being in the wilderness. Start camping those Revenants, and you're going to camp until you get the Accursed Scepter. And I know that sounds like a long grind, but when you're doing it on task, you have a higher drop rate on top of the multiplier, plus you're going to be absolutely shredding through these by ice barraging them, so it should be totally fine. They're going to give you a ton of GP to keep funneling into your runes, so you never have to worry about money, right? You never have to worry about running out of runes. You'll just keep casting. If you die, oh well, who cares? The PvP deaths are just PVM here, so you just get your stuff back, and you go right back into it. You find a new spot. Totally fine, totally reasonable. Once you get your Accursed Scepter, you want to get your Mage Arena 2 cape. As soon as you have the necessary magic levels to kill those bosses, as soon as you're comfortable going and getting that, get it as soon as possible, because that is another damage increase that you are getting. That is multiplies. It's an extra 2% damage. It's so good. You're then going to start working on the bosses. Jump into the wildy bosses. Anytime you can find an open spot, jump into those. At some point, you'll unlock your third region. And very similar to like last time, as soon as you hit that 90-something Slayer mark, go get your Occult. Go get your Tormented bracelet. Bring those with you. And it's just going to expedite everything to you. You're going to be in the wilderness a lot until you get that Void Waker. Once you have the Void Waker, and ideally, by that point, you've camped enough Revenants that you should also have a Webweaver bow. That's going to give you your melee weapon. So you're just going to hold on to the Void Waker as your melee weapon whenever you need to melee something. Specifically something like Akka's phases, right? You're going to be able to use that as a spec weapon to deal damage. You'll probably start most fights in TOA by speccing and doing a magic like a Accursed Scepter spec. Huzzah! Accursed Scepter is out. Any other specs you get as you regen and can dump specs, you're just going to Void Waker to deal extra damage. And then you're going to just blast with that Accursed Scepter in like Tombs of a Masket, and you're going to camp that until you get your Shadow, right? Until you get your best in slots. You'll have your Webweaver bow. Webweaver bow is a absolutely totally fine weapon to use as your range switch for the two phases, Akka and Warden, that you have to use range. It's a slightly better magic short bow outside of the wilderness. So totally fine, totally reasonable. Definitely recommend using it. very good, and all your bases are covered. You're not really missing out on anything. And lastly, we have the Asgarnia build. Now, the Asgarnia build is a little bit different than the other two. The other two builds we took because we wanted to make sure we weren't missing out on gear and damage increases for our mage setup, our main priority, right? With Asgarnia, we're taking a different approach to region selections here. Instead of saying, hey, I want the absolute best in slot, best gear I possibly can for my combat style, we're settling and we're saying, I want very good gear. It doesn't have to be the best, but as long as it's really close to the best, it is good enough, and I will shred things anyway. It doesn't matter, which is true. And instead of going for the absolute best gear, I want to make sure that my off specs, my off combat weapons, so your melee setup and your range setup in this case, are as good as they possibly can be, so that way when I switch to them, I don't feel like I'm missing out as much as everybody else is when they're making those switches. So this is our tribrid setup. It is here to make sure that you fill the gaps for all of your other gear, because with Kandarin and the desert, your melee setup isn't amazing. You're in Obsidian with a whip, and then if you happen to take Wildy, you also get the Voidwaker, right? Range-wise, you're in black D'hide and a rune crossbow, and that's it. Like, your setups outside of your magic setup are pretty bad. They're pretty mediocre. And while you can do some damage with them, and really in your raids, right, when you're looking at TOA, you shouldn't need to be in those setups that often, but you do need to be in them. And especially if you're soloing, the more damage you can do in those off setups, the faster your raids are ultimately going to be. And Asgarnia is our solution to that. Now, what does this give us for those other two setups? Well, Asgarnia gives us the God Wars dungeon, right? It is the God Wars dungeon region, like I mentioned in my Asgarnia video. And you have Bandos, which then gets turned into Torva, right? So now instead of wearing Obsidian, you are potentially wearing full Torva. You get Bandos Godsword specs, which are very, very good in TOA. You get a range setup in Armadil, right? Now, you might say, but doesn't TOA give range gear? It does. And if you didn't know, Missouri armor can be fortified and made even better with Armadil. So you can make that really, really, really strong gear. And then from a weapon standpoint, you also get access to the Armadil crossbow, which should be really easy for you to get. Just go in, run around, kite the boss, use your magic. Zilliana will just die. Getting an ACB should be relatively easy. And then you also have Nex. Nex is going to be a little bit tough with the mage build. I'm not going to lie. You are going to be pretty squishy, and you're going to be taking a lot of damage. And the more you're eating, the less damage you're doing. Nex is not the most ideal for us mage doers, right? Not impossible. Doing it in a mass, it will melt anyway so fast that it's not the end of the world. But it's something to keep in mind, right? If you're trying to get your full Torva, it might be a little tough. There will be KC tasks. It's a good stretch goal to have, though. It helps fill that gap of like, Zayav, I want to do more PVM after TOA. This gives you that, right? Getting full Torva is a massive upgrade, but not 100% needed. Bandos will be a huge upgrade in and of itself. And then same with like the Zerite crossbow. It's a huge upgrade from the AZB. But you will be just fine without it, and you don't need to actually max out all of your gear here. Your goal is just get a good setup for when you need to switch, and this definitely does that. So now let's talk about where Asgarnia actually fits into our plan, our route. And I think this follows the same pattern that the other ones do, where desert is too good early to pass up. I think we jump immediately into the desert. Once we're done getting our basic setup in the desert, we get our magics unlocked, we do a little bit of Slayer, we get some nice levels, we do MTA, we get a nice infinity set, right? I think it may be worth even to grab a master wand, because we're actually going to delay getting a powered staff in this route. We're not going to rush Slayer immediately. The reason for that is you don't have an amazing multi-combat bursting in this region for Slayer specifically. Technically, you can do Smoke Devils in the dungeon. You can do Bandits. The XP is going to be decent, but it's not going to be as insane as it is with like the Catacombs, right? And the things that the other routes happen to have. So we're going to actually push Slayer off a little bit in this route. And we're just going to get our basic setup. We're going to unlock our combat relic. We're going to unlock Asgarnia second. And we're going to rush and do Bandos very, very, very early. Now, the reason for this is, and ideally we get like last recall relatively early. We still don't know where we get that. But assuming we get last recall around the time where you're in your like second region and you're doing stuff, we're going to jump into doing Bandos. And we're going to last recall camp Bandos. Doing that will allow you to get your BGS and your melee setup set for TOA. Then we need our range setup, and we're actually going to do a rune crossbow skip. We are not going to get a rune crossbow at all. We're then going to go to Ziliana, and we're going to camp there. Both of these bosses have minions that are very, very blood barrage friendly, so you can heal up just off the minions. The extra damage from your relic is going to allow you to get some massive healing where you shouldn't need much food. You should be able to just bring a cup of emergency just in case you happen to get really unlucky and they stack you a little bit. You click some food, you're good to go, and just a ton of prayer pots. And you are just going to blood barrage camp these bosses. You should be able to self-sustain pretty well, even if you don't get last recall. So I think this is really, really doable. You're guaranteed to freeze, so you can freeze Bandos in place. Can't chase you, walk out of melee range, barrage, blood barrage whenever you start getting low on health. Super chill, easy boss to camp, okay? Ziliana, very similar, same kind of game plan. Get your Armadillo crossbow. Now, we're actually going to stop doing God Wars Dungeon at that point. We're done. We've got everything we want from God Wars Dungeon for now. And we're going to go back to the desert, and we're going to do that crafting training with the gem trader again and get up to the point where we can now make our black D hide. I think it is more beneficial to do that in this order than it is to camp Kree without having the best drop rates possible to get Armadillo. We can always come back. I think black D hide is a guaranteed good thing you can do early on. You get some good total levels, you make some GP. It is a win-win-win here. And we might as well wait and push that off just a little bit. So we're going to get our full black D hide by crafting of the tables. We can kill the black demons that are in Asgarnia. At this point, you'll probably be unlocking Kandarin. Now that Kandarin is unlocked, now is a great time to start focusing Slayer a little bit more. Your levels should be very, very chill. You can start doing some Slayer, and honestly, at this point, you can actually just start sending TOAs. If you have friends that you're wanting to play with, this is a great time to start jumping in, and you're just going to kind of mix and match between doing Slayer and TOA, start trying to get the Fang, work on really long-term goal of getting the Shadow. At some point, very similar, you'll be able to get your Tormented Bracelet because you'll get that Zenite drop. At some point, you'll be able to get your Occult Necklace. You can ignore Kandarin again, just do it for tasks when you need to, and boom, you are set in the Asgarnia route. You are off to the races with TOA with near best gear. You'll get your Trident as well, so you won't be camping your Master Wand or your Ancient Staff anymore. And you are 10 out of 10 big chillin'. And then as you start focusing on TOA more, anytime you want to break from doing that, because that is going to be a long grind, you actually have other God Wars Dungeon bosses we haven't touched. So you can go back to Armadillo. You can go back and kill Krill. You can go back and kill Nex, and you can use that as a great break from TOA that is still PVM. Or you can jump over to Kandarin and do all of that skilling content that it has to offer. Now to come full circle, I do want to mention again, this is not the end-all be-all as far as exactly the routes you have to take. These are just the ones that I think are going to be the most common and the most consistent, which are two very, very big things when it comes to knowing what you want to do and having fun with it, as well as really progressing your accounts and making sure that you can actually gun for some of those top ranks like a Dragon Cup, right? I think there are definitely some other routes that might be more RNG dependent or really wonky gear setups, but would definitely function. But I wanted to really present you guys with some really solid, consistent routing that you guys can do and game plan around on those first couple of days as we start getting all the tasks and relics announced, and you can mix and match things and see where little tweaks you're gonna want to make, because again, we don't have all the information either. But I think this will set you up for a really good foundation, a really good way of saying, hey, this is the combination that I want to do. This is the route I want to take. Now let's see how I can make the relics and stuff make that route even a little bit better than it was when we talked about it today.